The massive council chamber on Space Station Alpha buzzed with the usual noise of 200 alien species discussing galactic politics. The chamber's high crystal dome reflected the light of nearby stars, casting shifting patterns across the gathered representatives. At the center podium stood Admiral Tom, the human representative, trying not to show his frustration. "With all due respect," he said, keeping his voice steady, "retreating from a superior force to regroup and plan is not cowardice, it's strategy." The massive reptilian delegate from the Warriors of Iron slammed his armored fist on his console. "It is the mark of the weak. True warriors face death head-on, never turning their backs to the enemy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Humans had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and their ways still confused and frustrated the older species. While most alien races valued direct confrontation and glorious last stands, humans had a habit of withdrawing from fights they couldn't win, using guerrilla tactics and prioritizing survival over honor. Tom rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. The debate had started when human ships refused to join a suicidal charge against pirates in the Omega sector. Instead, they had tracked the pirates to their base and called for reinforcements. The pirates were eventually captured with minimal casualties, but the warrior races saw it as proof of human cowardice. "The numbers don't lie," Tom said, pulling up holographic battle statistics. "Human tactics have the highest success rate and lowest casualty figures in the galaxy." "Because you never fight," shouted another delegate, his crystalline form flashing with angry red lights. "You hide and scheme like prey animals." Before Tom could respond, the chamber's emergency lights flashed bright red. The main screen activated, showing a massive dark mass moving through space, consuming everything in its path. The image zoomed in to reveal millions of black, insect-like ships moving as one. "This footage comes from the edge of known space," announced the council president, her ethereal form glowing dimly. "The Omega Research Station detected this entity 3 days ago. We've lost contact with 6 colony worlds already." The chamber erupted in chaos. Tom studied the footage carefully, noting how the ships moved in perfect synchronization. "A hive mind species," he muttered. Finally, the Warriors of Iron delegate roared. "A true test of courage. We will meet this enemy in glorious battle." The warrior races began coordinating their fleets immediately, ignoring Tom's attempts to suggest caution. He watched as they planned a massive frontal assault, their most powerful ships gathered for an epic battle. Back in his office, Tom recorded a message to Earth Command. "They're going to get themselves killed," he said, sharing the battle plans. "The hive mind moves like a single organism. Traditional tactics won't work against something like this." He spent the next hours studying the enemy footage, noting patterns and behaviors that others had missed in their rush to battle. The hive mind ships never broke formation, suggesting they couldn't operate independently. They avoided certain energy frequencies, hinting at potential vulnerabilities. 3 days later, Tom's prediction proved tragically accurate. A combined fleet of warrior races, nearly 10,000 ships strong, launched their assault. The hive mind absorbed their attacks without slowing, its ships sacrificing themselves by the thousands to protect vital points that Tom had identified in his analysis. When the battle ended, 7,000 ships were destroyed. The hive mind had lost more ships, but simply grew new ones from the resources of consumed worlds. It continued its advance, now moving faster. In the council chamber, the mood was grim. The warrior races, for the first time in their histories, knew fear. Their greatest weapons and bravest warriors had failed. Tom stood at the podium again, this time facing a silent chamber. "We need to think differently," he said. "This enemy can't be beaten with direct force. We need to study it, understand it, and find its weaknesses. Humanity volunteers to lead this effort." "More cowardly tactics," someone muttered, but without the usual venom. "Call it what you want," Tom replied. "But ask yourselves this: what takes more courage? Dying gloriously in a battle you know you can't win, or facing the scorn of the entire galaxy while doing what needs to be done. Looking at the defeat in their eyes, Tom knew they would accept human help now. Sometimes, he reflected, the bravest thing you can do is admit that your way isn't working. The real test of courage was just beginning. The warriors of iron weren't done yet. Despite their devastating losses, they gathered their remaining forces for another assault. Their supreme commander, a towering figure covered in battle scars, refused to accept that brute force could fail. "We will attack with everything we have left," he announced to the council. "No retreat, no surrender." Tom watched from his observation post as 5,000 more ships gathered. These weren't just any ships. They were the elite forces, vessels that had survived hundreds of battles, the pride of every warrior race in the galaxy. The human analysis team worked around the clock, trying to process data from the first battle. Their temporary command center was filled with holographic displays showing ship movements and energy readings. Lisa, their lead analyst, spotted something concerning in the data. "The hive mind is learning," she reported to Tom. "It's adapting its formations based on our attacks. Each failed assault makes it stronger." Tom tried to share these findings with the council, but the warrior races wouldn't listen. Their pride had been wounded, and they were determined to prove their worth. The crystalline species, known for their powerful energy weapons, joined the assault this time. Their ships glowed like stars, charging their main guns. The second battle began at the edge of the Centauri sector. The combined fleet approached in a spear formation, their most powerful ships at the tip. The hive mind seemed to retreat at first, and cheers echoed across communication channels. "See, they fear our might," the warriors of Iron Commander boomed. Tom saw the trap forming too late. The hive mind wasn't retreating. It was spreading out, creating a massive net in space. As the Allied fleet pushed forward, black ships emerged from hidden positions, cutting off their escape route. "Pull back," Tom shouted over the emergency channel. "It's an encirclement." But the warrior races pressed on, seeing the opportunity to strike at what they thought was the hive mind's core. The crystalline ships fired their energy weapons, creating beautiful but ultimately useless light shows as the hive mind simply absorbed the attacks, using the energy to grow stronger. The slaughter that followed was worse than the first battle. The hive mind closed its trap, crushing ships like insects. The warriors of iron fought to the last vessel, refusing to flee even when defeat was certain. The crystalline ships shattered one by one, their fragments joining the debris field. In just 6 hours, the second largest fleet in galactic history ceased to exist. The hive mind consumed the wreckage, growing visibly larger. Worse, it had now acquired samples of the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The council chamber was silent when the casualty reports came in. Many seats were empty. Their representatives had died in the battle. The warrior races, for the first time in their recorded history, had no military forces left. "The hive mind's advance has accelerated," Tom reported, his voice heavy. "At current speeds, it will reach the core worlds in less than a month." The crystalline delegate, his form dimmed with grief, spoke softly. "We were fools. All our power, all our courage, meant nothing." Tom's team had made progress, though. During the battle, they had identified patterns in the hive mind's behavior. It wasn't just consuming ships and worlds. It was analyzing them, learning from them. Each victory made it more dangerous. "Traditional military power won't stop this threat," Tom explained, showing their findings. "We need a different approach. The hive mind is intelligent, but it's also predictable. It follows patterns we can exploit." "What can we do?" asked the council president, her glow barely visible now. "Our strongest warriors are dead. Our most powerful weapons are useless." Tom looked at the battle footage one more time. While everyone saw defeat, he saw something else: opportunity. The hive mind was perfect in its coordination, which meant it relied completely on its ability to control its parts. That was a weakness, if they were clever enough to exploit it. "We still have a chance," he said, But you'll have to trust the cowardly humans. We need to fight this enemy our way, with patience, strategy, and indirect action. The council members looked at each other. Their pride was gone, replaced by fear and desperation. Finally, the Warriors of Iron delegate spoke, his voice hollow with defeat. "We have no choice," he said. "Show us your way, humans. Teach us how cowards become survivors." The council chamber had never been so quiet as Captain Frank presented the human plan. The veteran spacer stood calmly at the podium, his weathered face showing none of the fear he felt inside. "We don't need a bigger gun," he explained, pointing to the holographic display. "We need to understand our enemy. My team proposes a stealth mission into hive mind territory." Gasps filled the chamber. Even the most desperate council members hadn't expected something this bold. The mission would require a ship to enter the massive cloud of hivemind vessels, gathering data from inside the swarm itself. "This is madness," the crystalline delegate flickered. "No ship could survive in there." Frank brought up the designs for their modified vessel, the Shadow Runner. It was small, barely larger than a standard transport, with experimental cloaking technology and biological camouflage. The ship could mimic the energy signatures of the hive mind's own vessels. "We've studied how the hive mind communicates," Frank continued. "Their ships exchange signals constantly. We can hide in their network, gathering intelligence while appearing to be part of their swarm." The council president leaned forward. "And who would crew such a mission? It would mean certain death if discovered." Frank's team stepped forward. 6 humans, each an expert in their field. Dr. Mike, their chief scientist. Lieutenant Bill, stealth systems specialist. Engineer James, who had designed their modifications. Communications expert Robert, pilot Kate, and medical officer Alice. "We volunteer," Frank said simply. The warrior races couldn't understand it. These humans, whom they had called cowards, were volunteering for what seemed like a suicide mission. There would be no glorious battle, no heroic last stand, just quiet, dangerous work that would likely end in their deaths. "If you're discovered," Tom warned from his seat, "we won't be able to rescue you." Frank nodded. "We know. But this is our best chance to find a weakness. The hive mind is too powerful to fight directly, but every system has a flaw. We just need to find it." The council debated for hours. Some argued it was a waste of resources. Others said it was too risky. But in the end, they had no better options. The Shadow Runner launched 3 days later, slipping away from Space Station Alpha under cover of darkness. As they approached hive mind territory, Frank gathered his crew for one final briefing. "This isn't about glory," he told them in the ship's small command center. "It's about survival, not just ours, but everyone's. We do this quietly, carefully, and we stay alive to deliver what we learn." The first test came sooner than expected. A hive mind patrol detected their approach, but instead of running, they activated their camouflage systems. The Shadow Runner's energy signature shifted, matching the patrols perfectly. For tense minutes, they drifted among the enemy ships, close enough to see the organic mechanical hybrid materials of their hulls. "Steady," Frank whispered, though the patrol couldn't hear them. "Let them pass." Engineer James monitored their systems carefully, camouflage holding. "They think we're one of them." The patrol moved on, and the crew released their held breath. But this was just the beginning. They would need to maintain this deception for weeks or months, always one mistake away from discovery. Some called it cowardice, this hiding and sneaking. But as Frank watched his crew work, monitoring enemy communications, analyzing patterns, and gathering crucial data, he saw nothing but courage. It took more bravery to stay calm in the face of constant danger than to rush into a glorious battle. The Shadow Runner slipped deeper into hive mind space, a tiny vessel swimming among giants. They passed the wreckage of the warrior fleets, now being consumed and converted by the hive mind. The sight strengthened their resolve. "We're going to find a way to stop this," Frank promised his crew. "Not with weapons or warriors, but with patience, intelligence, and the courage to do what needs to be done. The mission had begun. Now they just had to survive long enough to complete it. In the darkness of space, surrounded by an enemy that could discover them at any moment, 6 humans began their quiet work of saving the galaxy. 2 weeks into the mission, the Shadow Runner drifted through the heart of hive mind territory. The crew had settled into a tense routine, maintaining their disguise while gathering crucial data. Every day brought new discoveries and new dangers. "Look at this," Dr. Mike called out, pointing to his readings. "The hive mind ships aren't just communicating. They're sharing resources. Everything they consume gets broken down and redistributed through the swarm." Frank studied the data from his command chair. They'd positioned themselves near what appeared to be a processing center, where captured ships and materials were being broken down. The sight was both fascinating and horrifying. "Their efficiency is incredible," Engineer James noted. "No waste, no unused materials. Everything serves the hive." A sudden alarm silenced their discussion. Lieutenant Bill's hands flew across his stealth controls. "Large formation approaching. At least 300 ships. Hold position," Frank ordered. "Running could attract attention." The crew watched as a massive collection of hive mind vessels surrounded them. The Shadow Runner's camouflage systems strained to match the complex energy patterns. One mistake, one power fluctuation, would expose them. The ships were processing a newly captured space station. The crew watched in horrified fascination as the hive mind methodically dismantled the structure, breaking it down into basic materials. More disturbing were the organic components they detected. "They're not just consuming materials," Dr. Mike whispered. "They're absorbing DNA patterns, learning from every species they encounter. That's how they adapt so quickly." Communications expert Robert had been unusually quiet, focused intensely on his instruments. "Captain," he called suddenly, "I'm detecting something strange in their communication patterns. There's a rhythm to it, like music." Frank moved to Robert's station. The hive mind's communications appeared as waves on his screen, pulsing in regular patterns. "Can you isolate it?" "Working on it. It's complex, but there's definitely a central pattern. Everything flows from it." A sudden surge in hive mind activity forced them to stop their analysis. The Shadow Runner's engines hummed as they matched the swarm's movements, staying synchronized with the ships around them. "The pattern is changing," Kate reported from the pilot's seat. "They're getting agitated about something." Through their viewports, they saw the hive mind ships forming new configurations. A distant star system was their apparent target. The crew knew what that meant. Another world was about to be consumed. "Should we warn them?" Alice asked, her medical training making her especially sensitive to the loss of life. Frank shook his head grimly. "We can't. Breaking cover would doom not just us, but any chance of finding a way to stop this." It was the hardest part of their mission, watching worlds fall, unable to help. This wasn't the glorious combat the warrior races preferred. This was patient, painful work, gathering intelligence while appearing to be part of the very force they were fighting. But their patience was paying off. Every day brought new insights into how the hive mind functioned. They'd mapped communication patterns, identified key nodes in the network, and started to understand the complex hierarchy within the swarm. "Look here," Dr. Mike pointed to a new reading. "The ships closest to the central pattern Robert found. They're different, more advanced. I think we're getting close to something important." The Shadow Runner's crew had developed their own kind of hive mind, working in perfect synchronization. They'd learned when to hold position, when to move with the swarm, and most importantly, when to resist the urge to help those in danger. "We're their only hope," Frank reminded his crew during their daily briefing. "Every bit of data we gather brings us closer to finding their weakness. Remember that." As if testing their resolve, a distress call broke through their communications. A small transport ship, trying to escape the hive mind's advance. They could hear children's voices in the background. The crew looked to Frank, their faces showing the strain of their impossible position. Their ship could easily reach the transport in time, but doing so would reveal them, destroying everything they'd accomplished. "Stay on mission," Frank ordered, his voice rough. "We can't save them, but we might save everyone else." The Shadow Runner maintained its position, its crew watching in silence as the hive mind consumed another vessel. Their deception held, but the cost of their courage grew heavier each day. This was a different kind of bravery. The courage to watch, wait, and remember. A month into their mission, the Shadow Runner's discoveries were changing everything they knew about the hive mind. They'd found patterns no one had seen before, but transmitting this information back to the Council proved dangerous. "Their network is growing denser," Robert reported during the morning briefing. "We have to time our transmissions perfectly between their communication pulses." Frank nodded, studying the latest data. They'd managed to send weekly updates to the Council using brief, encoded bursts during rare gaps in hive mind activity. Their latest discovery was the most important yet. "The central ships," Dr. Mike explained, pointing to his screen. "They're not just controlling the swarm, they're growing it, like a brain creating new cells." The crew had noted how destroyed hive mind ships were quickly replaced. Now they knew why. The central vessels contained massive biological factories, creating new ships from consumed materials. A warning light flashed on Bill's console. Energy spike. Multiple ships changing formation. The crew snapped to action, adjusting their camouflage as a massive section of the hive mind swarm began to move. Through their viewports, they watched thousands of ships shift position, creating geometric patterns in space. "It's beautiful," Kate whispered from her pilot station, "like a dark ballet." "Beautiful but deadly," James added, monitoring their stealth systems. "Each new pattern makes them stronger, more efficient." Their observations were interrupted by an incoming transmission from the Council. Frank took it in his private chamber, keeping the signal masked within background radiation. "The warrior races are growing restless," Tom's hologram reported. "They're questioning the value of your mission. Some want to launch another attack while we still have ships left." Frank suppressed a surge of frustration. "We're close to something big. The hive mind isn't invincible. It has a structure, a pattern we can exploit. We just need more time." "Time may be running out. The hive mind has consumed 3 more systems since your last report. The Council is losing patience." After the transmission, Frank gathered his crew. They looked tired. Weeks of constant vigilance had taken their toll. But their eyes were still sharp, focused on their vital mission. "We need results," he told them. "Real findings we can use against them." Dr. Mike stepped forward. "I have a theory. The hive mind's not just a network, it's evolving. Each world it consumes adds to its complexity, but that might be its weakness." He brought up a display showing the hive mind's communication patterns. "See these fluctuations? The more complex it becomes, the more energy it needs to maintain control. It's like a brain trying to control too many bodies." "Can we use that?" James asked. "Maybe, if we could disrupt their communication at the right frequency, at the right time." A violent shudder ran through the Shadow Runner, interrupting their discussion. Alert signals flashed across every screen. "Massive energy surge," Bill reported. "The whole swarm is activating." Through their viewports, they watched in awe as every hive mind ship began to pulse with energy. The pattern spread like a wave through the swarm, each ship lighting up in sequence. "It's a test," Robert realized, studying the communications. "They're checking for anomalies in the network." Frank made a quick decision. "Power down everything except life support and camouflage. Make us look like a dormant node." The crew worked quickly, shutting down systems as the energy wave approached. The Shadow Runner went dark, drifting silently as the test swept over them. For long minutes, they waited in near-total darkness, barely breathing. The hive mind ships around them glowed with intense energy, scanning every particle in their vicinity. Finally, the wave passed. The crew restored power slowly, carefully matching the ambient energy levels of nearby ships. "That was too close," Alice said, checking the crew for signs of stress. "But it showed us something important," Dr. Mike added. "Did you see how the energy moved? It wasn't instant. There was a delay. The hive mind has limits." Frank looked at his tired but determined crew. They were onto something crucial. The hive mind wasn't an unstoppable force. It was a system, complex, but ultimately bound by physical laws. "Keep watching," he ordered. "Keep learning. We're going to find their weakness, and when we do, we'll have one chance to use it." The Shadow Runner continued its dangerous dance among the stars, a tiny ship playing the longest game in human history. Their patience and courage would be tested again and again, but they were humanity's best hope, perhaps the galaxy's only hope. 2 months into their mission, the Shadow Runner's crew made their final preparations. After countless observations and near disasters, they had found the hive mind's critical weakness. "The communication network isn't perfect," Dr. Mike explained to Frank in the ship's lab. "Each time they absorb new technology or biology, there's a moment of vulnerability while they adapt." Frank studied the complex diagrams on the screen. They had witnessed this phenomenon during the consumption of a scientific outpost. For a brief moment, the entire swarm had faltered, struggling to integrate new information. "And you're sure about the virus?" Frank asked. Mike nodded. "We've engineered it using their own biological components. They won't detect it as foreign until it's too late." The virus was their masterpiece, a biological computer program that would spread through the hive mind's network, disrupting their ability to coordinate. It wouldn't kill them, but it would break their connection to each other. Engineer James entered the lab, looking worried. "We have another problem. The stealth system can't take much more. We're starting to leave trace signatures." "How long?" Frank asked. 3 days, maybe 4 before they detect us." The timing was tight. They needed to get close to one of the central ships to release the virus, but those ships were the most heavily guarded. One wrong move would doom everything. Robert's voice came urgently over the intercom. "Captain, you need to see this." In the command center, Robert showed them a new communication pattern. The hive mind was gathering its forces, preparing for another major assault. "They're targeting the Council worlds," Kate said from her station. "The main fleet will reach them in less than a week." Frank made his decision. "We move now. Plot a course to the nearest central ship." The Shadow Runner began its most dangerous journey yet, weaving through the swarm, drawing closer to one of the massive ships that controlled the hive mind. Up close, it was enormous, easily the size of a small moon. "Stealth systems at 60% and dropping," James reported. "Life signs are off the scale," Alice added. "That ship contains millions of organic components." They watched the central ship through their viewports. Unlike the other vessels, it pulsed with a deep reddish light. Smaller ships constantly docked with it, transferring resources and information. "We'll only get one shot at this," Frank told his crew. "The virus has to enter their system at exactly the right moment." Dr. Mike monitored his instruments carefully. "Wait for my signal. We need them to begin a data transfer cycle." Minutes passed like hours. The Shadow Runner's stealth systems continued to degrade. Sweat beaded on Bill's forehead as he fought to maintain their camouflage. "Major data transfer beginning," Robert announced. "Multiple ships connecting to the central node." "Now," Mike shouted. Frank gave the order. The Shadow Runner released its payload, a small, seemingly harmless packet of biological material. It drifted toward the central ship, indistinguishable from the normal transfers happening all around it. "Virus deployed," Mike confirmed. "Now we wait." For several tense minutes, nothing happened. The crew held their breath, watching their instruments. Had they failed? Then they saw it, a tiny fluctuation in the hive mind's communication pattern. Then another, and another. "It's working," Robert whispered. "The disruption is spreading through their network." The effect began slowly but accelerated quickly. Ships near the central node started moving erratically. their perfect coordination failing. The beautiful patterns of the swarm began to break down. "We need to move," Frank ordered. "Get us out of here before—" He never finished the sentence. The space around them erupted in chaos as thousands of hive mind ships suddenly lost their connection to the central control. Some collided with each other, others fired weapons randomly. "Full power to engines," Frank commanded. "Get us clear." Kate piloted the Shadow Runner through the chaos, dodging debris and confused hive mind ships. Behind them, the disruption spread like a wave through the swarm. The central ship pulsed with angry red light as it tried to regain control. But it was too late. The virus had done its work, breaking the complex links that held the hive mind together. Without central coordination, the mighty swarm became nothing more than a collection of confused individual ships. As they fled to safety, the crew watched their sensors. The hive mind wasn't destroyed, but it was shattered. Instead of one unstoppable force, it had become thousands of separate entities, each acting independently. "Send the signal to the council," Frank ordered. "Tell them to strike now, while the hive mind is fragmented." The Shadow Runner raced home, leaving behind a changed enemy. The virus wouldn't last forever, but it had given the galaxy a fighting chance. The council chamber erupted in cheers as the Shadow Runner's crew entered. The same representatives who had once called humans cowards now stood in respect. Frank and his team walked quietly to the podium, still carrying themselves with the careful movements they'd learned during their mission. "The hive mind fleet has been reduced to scattered groups," Tom announced to the assembly. "Our combined forces have already contained half of them. Without their central coordination, they're no match for our defenders." The warriors of Iron Delegate, his armor now scratched and dented from recent battles, stepped forward. "We were wrong about humans," he declared. "We mistook caution for cowardice, patience for weakness. Today, we know better." Frank looked at his crew. They'd lost weight during their mission, and their eyes still held the haunted look of people who'd lived too long in constant danger. But they stood tall, knowing what they'd accomplished. "The virus won't hold forever," Dr. Mike warned the council. "The hive mind will eventually adapt, but now we understand them. We know their weaknesses." The crystalline delegate sparkled with renewed energy. "Tell us what you learned. Help us understand how you accomplished this victory." Frank nodded to his crew, and they each shared their part of the story. They explained how they'd lived among the enemy, studying rather than fighting, observing rather than attacking. How they'd endured watching worlds fall while they gathered the information needed to save everyone. "The hardest part wasn't the danger," Kate said. "It was staying hidden when we could have helped people. That took more courage than any battle." The council president's form glowed brighter than usual. "You've taught us something valuable about the nature of bravery. It isn't always about charging into battle or dying gloriously. Sometimes," Frank added, "courage means watching and waiting. It means carrying the weight of hard choices and living with them." Engineer James shared their technical data, showing how they'd maintained their deception for months. Lieutenant Bill explained their stealth systems, while Robert detailed the complex communication patterns they'd studied. Alice described how they'd managed the psychological strain of their mission. The council chambers fell silent as Dr. Mike explained the virus's design. "We didn't destroy them," he said. "We didn't have to. We just had to understand them well enough to find their weakness." The warriors of Iron Delegate spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. "Our greatest warriors died trying to destroy the hive mind. But you defeated them without a single direct battle. We must learn from this. All combat methods have their place." Frank responded diplomatically. "But victory doesn't always go to the strongest or the most aggressive. Sometimes it goes to the most patient, the most observant." The council voted unanimously to establish a new defense protocol, combining traditional military strength with human strategic approaches. The warrior races would learn stealth and patience, while humans would share their expertise in indirect warfare. "But what about when the hive mind returns?" asked a worried delegate. "We'll be ready," Frank assured them. "Not just with weapons and warriors, but with understanding." Knowledge is often the most powerful weapon of all. After the ceremony, Frank found his crew in their old briefing room on Space Station Alpha. They sat quietly, still adjusting to being around other people, still fighting the instinct to hide. "It feels strange," Alice said, "not having to watch every movement, measure every word." "We'll adjust," Robert replied, "just like we adjusted to living among them." Frank looked at his team with pride. They had accomplished something unprecedented, not through force or heroic sacrifice, but through careful observation and patient planning. "The galaxy sees courage differently now," he told them. "You showed them that bravery comes in many forms." The station's viewport showed a star field now clear of hive-mind ships. In the distance, patrol vessels moved in new patterns, combining human caution with traditional defensive formations. The galaxy was changing, learning from humanity's example. "We're not done," Dr. Mike reminded them. "The hive mind will evolve, adapt. We need to keep studying, keep learning." Frank nodded. The Shadowrunners' mission had ended, but their work would continue. They had shown the galaxy a different kind of courage, not the courage to die gloriously, but the courage to live carefully, think deeply, and act wisely. They had redefined bravery itself, proving that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in the thunder of battle, but in the quiet moments of patience and observation. The Orcs, cowardly humans, had become the galaxy's teachers, showing that true strength often lies in knowing when not to fight.